That's Drew.
And that's Mike.
And that's Ben Levitt.
What's going on, guys? How's it going?
Thanks for being here, Ben.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk YouTube today. Don't get too many opportunities to do this, so I'm excited.
Me too. And a lot of other things. So for our listeners, Ben is very knowledgeable, and he is the creator of Bunny Media, the host of the podcast named Passion Project, and the digital strategist behind a self-titled YouTube channel where you can learn how to crush it in your own social media, marketing, and branding. With over 3.1 million views across 152 videos, Ben's channel has now grown to a subscriber base of nearly 60,000 and is full of information about how to build presence across all outlets from podcasting to TikTok. Follow the links in our bio for more about his self-proclaimed social media nerdery, and keep an eye out for new instructional courses after you subscribe. Ben, once again, thanks for your time today, man.
Of course. I'm excited to talk it up. I think that was a great intro. You nailed it. So perfect start.
He's got an uncanny ability to do that. It's like he can look at a channel and just digest it and then put it into words that make total sense. I can't do that. I'm not good. Like,
not easy to do.
No, it's not.
It's a skill that you mentioned I want to talk about later, which is listening. And it's something that, there's that axiom or adage, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. You should listen twice as much as you talk. That sticks with me all the time, but that's further down the line. Let's start with your past, man, and where you grew up and what you were interested in as a kid. Maybe start drawing some lines about how you got into social media.
Yeah, for sure. So I'd say that definitely played a big role. Grew up in Ontario, which is probably the most popular province in Canada. And then more specifically, I grew up in a town called Oakville. Was big into sports. My dad was an athlete growing up, so that was just kind of the path for me. Was very big into like selling and flipping things. I was at my first business, I would say, is I started selling what we call pop. I think some of you guys would call it soda in the States. I started selling pop out of my locker. So that was like the first dipping my toes into entrepreneurship. And I was probably like 8 or 9, but they banned sugary drinks. So my parents were a big Costco family because we had a lot of siblings. So I had tons of pop at home. So I started hoarding it and started flipping it out of my locker. And then I turned that into Pokemon cards, and then I'd sell and trade those at school too. So that was definitely like a big early on passion. But what I would say is that entrepreneurship wasn't celebrated when I was a kid as much. So it wasn't as sexy as it is now, or how people view it as now. So my whole plan in my whole life was football. That's what I was going to do. My dad was a football guy, went to college to play football, and that was the route that was laid out for me. And that's what I was going to do. So all the while still being very interested in entrepreneurship and watching entrepreneurs. Like I would say some of my biggest idols were entrepreneurship creators, like people who were making YouTube content and then translating that into a business. But I was more so just viewing it from a consumer because I was going to be a football player. So fast forward, that path came to be. I went and played football at a Canadian school called the University of Guelph. And about 2 semesters in, I had enough injuries where I called it a day. I had concussions, torn ACL, like you name it. They really came out and said, okay, Ben, you got to stop playing kind of thing. That's how I viewed it. So I stopped, went back to the drawing board a little bit and started to think about like, what else was I into? And then that's where I came back to the social stuff and was like, okay, I really want to be an entrepreneur. That was the end goal. Like if I wasn't going to play in the NFL, which was the ultimate plan, the next thing was I want to be an entrepreneur that then buys my favorite NFL team. Like that was something I was saying when I was like 10 or 11, right? So I guess now I was just like, okay, well, this whole plan's now been expedited. I now skipped the NFL. So now I have to get into the real world things of building the businesses. So I went back to how I saw all these people that I looked up to, and they were using social media as the vehicle to do that. So that's where I started. And I just started making awful videos. So, and then it eventually scaled into what it is today, but it started off real messy.
So I'm kind of surprised to hear that football was your passion or your path back then, because that's not something that I would expect from north of the border, really. I'm curious what the path towards becoming a professional football player is through Canada. You mentioned the NFL being the end goal, but what is that like? Because I was going to ask, do you mean American football? Do you mean international football? What kind of football do you mean? So tell me a little bit about that, just because I know nothing about it.
Yeah, so definitely American football through and through. I'm not a soccer guy. My parents made me play soccer, and I quit that as soon as they let me. I liked to hit people growing up, so I played hockey and football. And I was just football was the first thing that I was really good at. And I think that changed everything for me because I didn't start off good, but I wanted to be good so bad. And I put in the time and effort and saw that you can literally change your entire situation through that. And so that's why I gravitated to it so much, and it became part of my identity. So the pathway is I played for one of the best teams, like rep teams is what we would call it. It's more of like a travel team before high school. So I played in that. We would travel all over the province. We were like ranked like top 5 in the country kind of thing. And then I went to one of the better high schools. And then there were some issues with the coach, and I transferred to another high school and then played there. And then the route is to go typically CIS, which is what our NCAA would be called. So it's like the Canadian sports equivalent. Obviously, ideally you go to the NCAA, but there's very, very few recruiters coming down this way. There is more now, I would say, but because of people like Chase Claypool and Gilmore on the I think he's on the Cowboys. There's a bunch more Canadians now that are really making a name for it. But when I was coming out, unless you're being a big advocate for yourself, which I didn't learn, I had the blessing and the curse of having an amazing what would that be? You guys would call it your junior season. So when I was in grade 11, what we call it here, I had the best football season I've ever had. So I had scouts from Canada all over me, and I just kind of got almost cocky, I'd say, where I felt like, oh, I don't need to make a demo tape or a highlight tape. Like if they're already talking to me like this now, it is what it is. And then in grade 12 or senior year, it wasn't nearly as good. So I had to go with one of the schools that I had previously spoken to. But yeah, that was the path. It's like travel ball, high school, and then CIS. And then we actually have a pro league here called the CFL. So that would have been the more realistic route.
Okay.
Do people transfer from the CFL to the NFL?
Occasionally, it's very difficult to do, but that's typically the goal. So Warren Moon played in the CFL and in the NFL. Flutie played in the CFL and the NFL. There's been a few guys. Cameron Wake is probably the most recent one that had a big impact in the NFL, but it's not too common, but it does happen.
That's interesting. I was on the same page as Drew.
Yeah. And going back there, what sort of influencers were you watching at that time through your interest in football, through your passion in football, that got you started into watching YouTube and beginning to look up to those people?
Yeah. So I found one of the influences was Gary Vee. I found Gary Vee when I was like 13 or 14. Like I must have been one of the first people who ever came across his content. And when I was watching it, this was stuff that I was saying to my friends, and they were looking at me like I had 4 heads. So it was like, I'm like, wow, like where's this guy been all my life? So that was a big proof of concept for one thing. And then another element of influence that I had was a big piece of football training with me being like a year-round athlete. We'd play the whole time was training. So like lifting weights. So I started becoming obsessed with nutrition and fitness. Mm-hmm. And I saw that was when fitness YouTube was popping. Like some of the biggest players in the space were fitness creators. And that's what really opened my eyes to how you can transition this. And this is leverage that you're creating for yourself. Because I would look at creators, and the one that jumps to mind is Christian Guzman. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of him. So he was one of the first guys that I watched, and he was no different than I was. And he transitioned this into numerous businesses and had more of a bigger vision for himself. And he brought it into a reality through the leverage that he created. So that was the first person that I watched. And then it just snowballed from there with more and more like-minded creators.
Yeah.
It would have been an interesting path for someone with such an entrepreneurial spirit to go into the NFL, because I feel like so many people are so just kind of stuck on the vision of just being the athlete. And then when, they get through 2 or 3 seasons and they get an ACL tear, and then they're out for a couple, and then they're done, and they're passed around to a couple teams, then they don't know what to do. But if you go in with that mentality of like, hey, I'm going to use some influence, I'm going to grow my business, I'm going to build some business acumen, you could really like set yourself up for life, not only being the professional athlete. So it would have been really cool to see someone like you make it there, not for so many reasons, but
Yeah. And that was actually a big part of the plan. Like, when people would ask me, like, why do you want to play football? I was aware that it was a fleeting sport. You can only play a few years typically in the NFL. And I was well aware of that. It was more of a vehicle to also achieve the longer term vision, where like if I could draw out my plan, and I did when I was little, it was to go play NCAA at Michigan, football there. I obviously didn't get there, but that was the first step of the plan. And then after that was to be drafted to the Jaguars, play there, then go move to Jacksonville, become a mainstay in their community, build businesses, and then eventually buy the team. That was the life vision. Most of that has not come to be, but I'm still holding out hope to buy the team. That is the ultimate.
Well, you get that sweet pool in the stadium. So
it's all worth it.
Yeah, all worth it. You get your own pool that overlooks the stadium. Like, it's all worth it.
That's where I'd watch every game.
Yeah, I would too. So 2 questions, because I think there's like these weird underlying things. And we understand why you love football, and the passion from that obviously comes from your father and the sport back there, but how did you from Ontario fall in love with a team from Jacksonville, Florida, as well as we were just talking about geographically where you're located.
Yeah.
How does Michigan play into this story as well?
Yeah. So I'm a very loyal person, and that holds true with sports franchises as well. So apparently I'm a sucker for punishment with Jacksonville. I've dealt with a lot of pain over the years. I've been a fan, like a hardcore NFL fan, since I was like 7 or 8 years old. And there was no rhyme or reason to the choice. I was a running back growing up. So I picked my favorite running back, which was Fred Taylor at the time. And then they also had my favorite logo. So it was a match made in heaven. Therefore, I was a Jaguars fan for the rest of my life. And where Michigan comes into play was the more that I played football, like going to NCAA was like a potential realistic thing. And my dad had talked about how different it is in the States to go to a game and how much more serious they take it. And the atmosphere and the experience is just tenfold what it is here. And so my first experience of that was Michigan. And I think that I can pinpoint the moment where like everything changed and I became like a lifelong Michigan fan was when I walked into the big house and I got like hit in the face with air and like sound. It was just the coolest experience. I was probably about 11 or 12. And that was the moment I was like, hey, like I would love to be on that field one day. And then also like invigorate 114,000 people. Like that'd be the dream. So that's how they both came in. And how we ended up in Michigan is we have some family friends that live right there. He's actually a cop in the Ann Arbor area. So that's how we ended up down there.
Wow. That's pretty cool. I mean, it just seems that, the more people I've talked to about, I'm not a big football fan at all. And I think my dad was never into it. So it kind of matched the opposite. But through work, I've met so many people that are big football fans. And I'm always like, oh, how'd you like find your team? And people are always like, oh, when I was a kid, I loved their logo. I like the colors. I picked that. So I've been a fan since I was 10. I'm like, I don't understand, but it makes total sense. Like you're a kid, you get drawn to it. And then I like that color. I'm going to be that team. Yeah.
And I think it is the emotional investment. Like once you're attached, especially if you're a passionate person, you get dug in there. It's the same with sports. Like you just get so attached to that, and that's your team. And that's really what makes sports so great, even when it's bad, right? It's still amazing because you have something to root for.
Yeah. And you're like you said, you're just dug in. And if you've been from 10 to 15, what's the difference for another 40 years,
Exactly. I'm in the long haul at this point. I couldn't, like, at this point, I've already dealt with, I feel like it can't get worse at this point. So it's only up.
Yeah. So you graduate high school, don't have a great successful senior year, find yourself at, I'm going to butcher this, I think, Guelph.
Yep. No, you got it.
Got it. I'm basically Canadian now. Just kidding. University of Guelph. You attended the Lang School of Business and Economics.
Yep.
I mean, this might be a simple question, but what was the choice of? Is there multiple schools within the University of Guelph, and why that specific school?
For sure. So it goes back largely to with football was dictating my life for the most part, and after that grade 11 game or junior game, it was a championship game. And I had like 200 yards of offense. I was featured in the newspaper, but we lost. Like it was the best game I've ever played. And I was puking over the whole game. It was a crazy story, but it was like just happened. It was amazing. And all the scouts happened to be there at the same time. So I thought it was only up from here. And then the next season, we're allowed to go. I don't know if it's the same over there, but you're allowed to do like a super senior year in high school. And I didn't know this, but so after leading the entire league in all-purpose yards, the next year, for whatever reason, the coach just stops giving me the ball. And I asked the coach, I'm like, what is this? What's going on? And he's like, we're saving you for the playoffs. The playoffs come, the same thing continues. So I was like, I lost it one time in practice, and I just started like killing everybody. I was taking out, I was so sorry for everyone that I hit in practice, but I was just going nuts, taking my frustration from the coach out on him. And he finally was like, Ben, what's your problem? So I lost it. I was like, what's your issue? Blah, blah, blah. And then he told me that he was trying to get me to come back for a super senior season because we were going to get bumped up to the highest tier in the province, which meant he's like, if with you gone, our chances are worse. And I was just so angry. I'm like, you clearly don't know me very well, because so now I'm leaving 110%. There's no chance that I'm coming back because you did that. So I then called up all the recruiters who I had spoken with previous. And out of all the schools, the best fit that I saw from an academic perspective and like an opportunity to play for a great program was Guelph. And Guelph also had a huge recruiting tool back in the day before they changed the rules, was they were essentially the Oregon of Canada. So they were the tons of jerseys, all the swag. So all the kids wanted to come there. Like they have a barbershop in there in the clubhouse and stuff like that. So it was like the cool place to go, and it was an up and coming program. So I was like, hey, that's where I'm going. Like I'm out. That's why I chose there.
Oh, that makes sense. To me, it doesn't, from a coaching standpoint, it doesn't make sense that why wouldn't he have that conversation with you saying, hey, we're gonna beef your stats up this year. I'm gonna get you really, really high, but then what we're gonna do is play you again next year as a super senior, and you're gonna get even further, because that could have gotten you maybe even the University of Michigan, something like that.
Like Michigan would have been tough because I understand that like they just don't view us through the same lens. But had things gone my way, I know absolutely would have been possible for me to go D1 NCAA, just because like I've played it in tournaments where we'd play against guys who would then go play that level. And would it have taken a ton of work? Absolutely. And would I have been the best guy in the field? Not a chance. But I knew I would have had an opportunity. And had he had that conversation, I would have potentially been open to it. But it was just handled incredibly poorly. And then it just resulted in some really ruined relationships. And it sucks, but it shaped me into who I am today. So everything happens for a reason. So it is what it is.
Yeah, the reality is you very well might have not gotten the major that you got, and that could have hindered your success to where you are today. You know, a lot of D1 athletes are forced to take some, I don't want to say a simple major because nothing's simple about going to college, but they take something that they're not passionate about because they can get A's and they can get degrees out of it.
The same thing happens here. So in my recruiting class, a ton of us started in different majors like marketing, economics, and finance, and all of them switched into leadership. Yeah. Like literally every guy on the team. I checked when they all graduated. None of them graduated with their entering program. So you're absolutely right.
I mean, I'm the same way. I graduated college with a business degree, similar to yours. Yep. But I started as a pre-med major. I did one class with, you know, the transition to full-time athlete and school and trying to have a social life. It was not working. So I was taking this class with our other buddy, Tim, and we were rotating who would go to the 8 a.m. and take the notes and pass them, because like we would go to practice at 5:30, come back, and I'd go to bed. He's like, okay, I'll go to class. It just didn't work for me. So I went into a major and actually clicked. It actually worked better for me. But
and what was your sport?
I swam in college. Yeah, it was fun. Yeah, it was. It's over now, right? I can't live those glory days. So you're attending the Lang School of Business, and you are famous through a couple interviews I saw that you paid off your student debt 1 year after graduating college from YouTube, right? That I think is something that's been stated. I want to talk a little bit about after this question. Yeah. But what is not talked about is the fact that during college and during the first 2 years of college, you're a student athlete and you're hustling. Like you did a lot of jobs during your college career. Some of them are, you're a brand ambassador for Summer Fresh Salads. You did a real estate marketing internship. You worked at the Canadian Digestive Health Foundation, worked as a campus promotion from Excel. You worked as a student ambassador for Amazon, right?
Yeah.
How did you manage that time and those commitments, and where did that hustle truly come from?
Yeah, and there's a few things that weren't even on that list, and then a few of my own side hustles and stuff. Like it was a necessity, unfortunately. Like so, especially once part of the schooling was gonna be paid for via football. So as soon as that was out of the question, then now the financial burden was on me. So I knew that I had to pay that off, and I hate debt so much. So even though I was getting student loans, I wanted to be able to get those rid of those as soon as possible. So I'd say the hustle came from a necessity point of view. I would say that also both my mom and my dad are incredibly hardworking people, and both of them are well off in their own right, but they never gave us too much above our means. Like we were never hurting, but we definitely had to earn anything we wanted. And that was learned from a pretty young age that if you want something, even if I wanted my own football equipment, I would pay for it and things of that nature. So I think that's what came from it. And I also thought about, like, I looked, especially in the States, it's even more of a problem. I'd look at how long people are tied to their student debt, and it really shapes where they go in life. And it's something that they can never get rid of. So I wanted to make sure that I would be in the best position possible to get rid of that as soon as possible. Plus, school's really expensive. Like just living. And I was like, I looked at it myself, and I said, I only have 4, maybe 5 years here because I was in the internship program. I want to live this right. Like, I don't want to look back on this and say, oh, I didn't have enough money to try this or to do that. So I knew that I was going to have to sacrifice time. And that meant that I had to pick up jobs, side hustles. So I used to buy tickets to like the sporting events and then sell them myself to people who weren't willing to get up early enough and things of that nature. So it really just came from, I wanted to be able to do everything. And as someone who didn't have unlimited money, I had to generate what I could. And so I did that in traditional senses with jobs and maximizing ones that would allow me to still live the life that I wanted to and get stuff done. And then also manufacture my own opportunities via different entrepreneurship or flipping things of that nature. It was really just what needed to be done for what I wanted to do.
Yeah, it seems like it stemmed all the way back to 8th grade or that locker, right? Selling some pop.
Yeah,
So,
it was.
yeah. I want to learn a little bit about one thing from Guelph and what is the League of Innovators? It seems awesome. I don't know what it is though.
Yeah. So the League of Innovators is like this, it's like this entrepreneurship community that started from actually like there's some very well-known entrepreneurial people. Like one of the key founders or partners is one of the people on Dragon's Den, which is our equivalent of Shark Tank. So she's
right on.
Yeah, so she's a big time entrepreneur. She's got some crazy businesses. She's multimillionaire. She's actually, you guys may have heard of her latest project. Have you heard of Clearbank? It's a equity firm that provides money specifically for startups for Facebook and Instagram ads and things of that nature. So it's very cool. So what that was is it connects with people at universities primarily to open up to the doors of entrepreneurship and what's capable there. So it's a very cool initiative.
Wow, that is it's interesting that they have such prominent, alumni in it too. It seemed really important on your LinkedIn page, so I definitely wanted to make sure we talked about it. It's a really cool opportunity. It seems like this business school had a lot of great things to it, and it was a good stepping stone at least the 2 years after you were not playing football.
Yeah. And you can probably see that it picked up a lot after football.
Yeah.
But what I would say for anybody who's in school is there's programs everywhere. You have to go join them or you have to find them. And even if there's not affiliation of at your school, like the League of Innovators is a perfect example of that. Like they had no affiliation with the school until I became affiliated with League of Innovators. And then they had an affiliation with the University of Guelph. So like there's so many opportunities out there. And I viewed it as I wanted to have like a very diversified one resume, but two like skill base, right? So I wanted to attach myself with as many things as possible. And university or college opens up so many opportunities. Being a student is actually quite a powerful thing. People will respond to the subject line of like, I'm a student, I want to do X, Y, Z far more than they will somebody off like randomly cold calling them or emailing them. So definitely leverage the student card.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely agree with that statement. So just want to talk about something you just said, building up the resume. And traditionally, someone is building up their resume to take that resume to a major business and say, hey, hire me. But you say you didn't take the path that you did, right? To YouTube and to growing and being your own. Like being such an entrepreneurial spirit, do you think you would have done well in the corporate dated 9-to-5 life?
No, not at all. Like I would have been an awful employee. But the thing, and this is the strangest thing, and probably my only regret of going to school and sticking with it is even while I was in school, I was talking about how I was going to work for myself. And then I only ever needed a corporate job because I had the debt or like the no money situation from going to school, even though the whole time the plan was to work for myself. So that's my only real regret with going to school. I do not think I would have thrived in I think I could have been great in a corporate environment, or I think I never would have had a problem. I understood that so much of a job and how people think of you, it comes down to like psychology and how they feel about you. So I was very, very good from like my early jobs of getting the right people to like me. And that makes such a difference in terms of how that job and that experience goes for you. So I think I would have been fine and they would have thought I was a great employee, but in my heart, I would have known that I was an awful employee because I would have been trying to do my own stuff.
Yeah, you would have always had something on your mind. It's not like you're jumping the fence to go to another business. You're like, I'm just getting out on my own. Yeah. That it is an interesting thing to think of, but because I do think, the skills that you've shown here, you would be a great employee on a corporate scale, like especially in like a sales job, you would have killed it. Like get out there, meet people, hustle, you know how to do that.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you would have ever achieved the happiness that you're in today. And so
I don't think so.
Yeah. And so that stems to the beginning of your YouTube channel, right? And Drew and I were talking about it. It's very different than who you are today. And the stories that you just told us make a lot of sense.
Mhm.
So I started looking more so about the ACL injury, and you talked about that earlier.
Mhm.
So how impactful do you think? Right, there's no, not a T in the, what am I trying to, a fork in the road. Wow. All right, a fork in the road here in your life, and one is like you're driving to be a professional athlete, but the other side is like I tore my ACL. It's not going to be the dream. It's not going to happen, but I have all these other skills. So how actually important was it for you to tear your ACL?
Yeah. And it's strange to think about it that way
Yeah,
because it was a
very.
terrible experience, but I think you're right. It was incredibly important because I think without that, I'm probably a few years behind where I am now, and maybe it never even happened. So I think that's been huge. And I would say that I even owe sports to a lot of that because it's a big thing in life and sports is making the best out of a bad situation, right? So that was an opportunity where I knew that I wanted to go the YouTube in my own route. And I just said, okay, this has got to be fate or whatever you want to say, pushing me in and say, this situation sucks. But because I did a bit of research on YouTube, I saw there was nobody else making videos on this terrible situation. So I just said that this has got to be a sign to start getting in there and actually take the plunge and do it, because there's a lot to be said about talking and planning, but without action, nothing comes to be. And without that nudge that the ACL tear provided, I probably don't do this. I'm probably not having this conversation with both of you awesome people right now, if not for that terrible injury. So it played a vital role. And I think that I guess I'm grateful for that torn ACL as much as it sucked, but it did shape the position that I'm in right now. And I'm very happy with where that is.
It is a weird
I
way
think
to.
that's a real quick. I just think that's a pretty life altering mentality to get to the point where you can develop and foster gratefulness for adversity. That's something that you speak about on your channel too, is that adversity is inevitable. It's just part of being a human being and part of living on this earth. But I think if you have that mental switch where you recognize like, oh, bad things aren't always bad. They're not always 100% bad, that I can appreciate and dig out light from the darkness. It like you open untapped potential, really. You
Yeah,
sort of just like get rid of fear. You're like, well, if that's true, what do I have to be afraid of, really? Like,
you're 100% right. And I think I owe a lot of that to, like, growing up, there's a lot of adversity in my household, and like there wasn't a lot of that in my peer group, but I saw how that made me different in a lot of positive ways. And I think being able to understand that was very, very freeing. And even though after the ACL was very, very low, I thought about how many other things I went through and how they shaped me into a more positive person, employer, whatever you want to say. So why can't this do the same? And you're absolutely right. It's a very freeing thing. Plus, there's nothing positive that comes from stewing on something that's negative. Like, it only makes it worse. And with how short of a time we have on this planet, I don't want to spend any of it on a negative thing. Why not just work to the next positive? So that's the approach that I take with everything, because I don't think there's any other way to do it.
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Oh,
you
yeah.
say that a lot in your videos too. You say like, I was watching one today about podcast starting, and the number one reason why people are having issues is because they just don't do it. And sometimes it's a push, and sometimes it's a pull, and sometimes that pull might be watching your video and saying, I'm just going to go do it. Sometimes it's like, I tore my ACL. I got to do it. I'm just going to do this because I'm off my feet or something like that. So I think it's a pretty cool opportunity you took advantage of.
Sure.
I want to talk about one other thing from, like, it might be current, but it might also be past. And so, like, you're also a writer, right? You have written a couple articles based, and I found two that were pretty interesting. A guide to navigating the world of interns, and it was called "Hey Intern." And I like the thumbnail. You're very good with thumbnails. It was like a little hello name tag, right? And explaining the concept of personal branding to my 80-year-old grandparents. So once again, these two skills clearly come from your YouTube skills, because that's a great title, and the other one had a great thumbnail. Explain to me, like, why was the drive to write articles to post onto LinkedIn?
I enjoy writing a lot. I am someone who I didn't read a lot growing up, but that was because I'm very analytical in my thought of things and in my approach to things. And I just would look at it objectively and be like, why would I read this book when I can enjoy it 10 times more and save the time and watch a movie? So I would honestly say this almost proudly. I went through all of my JK to grade 12, I never read a book, and I wrote essays on like 12 of them because I just didn't feel like that was, I just didn't feel like that was a good use of my time. Where I was like, if I can still pass the essay and not read the book, why would I not do that? But
I did the same thing.
I liked to see, you're my kind of guy, but I liked to write. But my handwriting was
Same here too. That's funny.
It was so bad. Like so many teachers have tried to give me different handheld things, and so I never really. I'd have all these beautiful, like even poems and stories that I would say in my head when I couldn't fall asleep as a kid, but I could never write them out because it was such a chore for me to handwrite things. So once I got a laptop for the first time, I was just writing all the time, and like my English marks went up way more. It was just because I couldn't get it out as fast as I was thinking it when I had to write it. So that's where I would say it came from. Was it was very much like an expressive tool, because I think so much, and especially when I'm trying to sleep, I just come up with so many ideas and stories. So it became like a therapeutic thing where I would just get it out there, and then it would turn into whatever it did. So very big fan of writing things. I plan to write books just because I feel that I get a lot from it, and if anyone can get anything else from it too, I think there's a lot of value there.
I mean, it sounds like you've started to transition, sort of going more into the future, more into the present now, but your YouTube channel transitioned a lot from what seemed like vlogging style things to more in the past year and a half, getting towards sharing your knowledge and your experiences with people. And it seems like that has made your YouTube channel take off a whole lot. For our listeners, what has the past year brought to your YouTube channel? Or I guess I should go before that. And where was the transition from going from more vlogging and personal style YouTube channel content to sharing your knowledge of building up social media presence and building up your overall social outgoing personality?
Yeah. So I started off, I think like many people do, of just trying to be vloggy. And I think a lot of people come to this pretty harsh reality of no one cares, right? About Ben from Canada. Like, why would they care? And after enough thought and self-reflection, I came to that conclusion myself. And no one was watching the videos, even though I had invested a ton of time researching and how to frame these videos, all this stuff, and still no one was watching them. Eventually, you kind of got to look in the mirror and say, you're probably the reason why this isn't happening. And objectively, can you say that this is a good return on investment for the time that they would spend watching it? The answer was no. Like, with the exception of maybe the ACL videos, but otherwise, what do they get with that? If it's a personal vlog, they get that level of connection with you. But if they don't know you, that value's not even there. So that's out of the equation. So then I thought about, okay, well, if I want to grow this, I need to help people through these videos. And I was already working in social for businesses and people I knew and helping them grow that stuff. So I started making videos on that. And that's when really like everything changed, because I think a great thing to do is to constantly be listening to yourself and listening to your surroundings. And I quickly saw that this stuff that I do now with social came very naturally to me, but not other people. If you come across something like that, you should double down on that, because that's an opportunity. That's the opportunity knocking, saying you should really run with this, because who knows where you can take it. So that's where I went with that. And I started making content around these subjects, and it changed everything. And in terms of specific numbers, over the past year, it's been about 50,000 subscriber increase. So literally, if you spoke to me like 13 months ago, I would have been at 9,000 subscribers. And today we're going to pass 60,000. And it all came from shifting the approach to video creation, because I think previously it was more from a selfish point of view. And that's totally fine if this is meant to be that, like a place where you just store memories and this is for you and your family. That's fantastic. That's great. I wasn't in it for that. I wanted to turn this into more of a lifestyle and a gateway and a business. So for that to happen, like any business in the world, there has to be an equitable value exchange. And that tweak was where it made all the difference.
That is a extremely business oriented decision. Like, that is what I think right there, that comment paid for your entire degree, because most people would just say, I'm just going to keep pounding vlogs because Casey Neistat did it for 5 years before he had traction. Look, that the day and age is over. That age is over, right? You pivoted just like any business does that is successful. And that right there, I think you paid for your college degree with that statement.
Okay, well, that makes me feel a little bit better about the money that I spent then.
Yeah. Well,
that's funny too that you point out the business side of things, because I was close to interrupting you when you said realizing that nobody cares. So I was like, that's also a very freeing realization, just like the realization that adversity is a good thing. The realization that nobody really cares about like sort of your personal things is a very freeing realization if you just accept that and sort of objectively look at it, because then you get to that point where you can self-analyze without the, without the sort of emotion that's inevitably a part of that. You can take that objective look and that third party look and look at my channel and be like, well, nobody cares about that. And that's fine. Like, but that just means that I need to change my perspective on it, my approach, and provide value. Because if the value is just like an attention suck inwards, yeah, nobody's going to care. They got to get something out of that too, right?
Yeah, I think the ability to be objective and when needed, self-critical is imperative for any creator, business owner, whatever. Or you, at the very least, you need to have someone who will be that type of influence in your life, because otherwise you're leaving so much on the table. Because no one has the answers to everything. And if you don't like reflect and adjust from there, then who knows where it could have gone had you spent that little bit of time, maybe swallowed that bit of pride and actually made the change that could help propel you to where you want to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just pulled up your channel over here, and when I was looking at it earlier, it's 59.9. You're at 60K. So congratulations.
That's awesome.
Big move right there.
It's amazing.
So you make that change, right? Like you come to this realization internally and you're like, I'm going to change my channel completely. And you took a lot of cues. Like I just looking through the growth of the channel itself. You always had good like titling and kind of thumbnail-esque. They've obviously gotten significantly better now, but how did you learn that those items were important? What was your research path to start this going into it? Because it seems like you do a lot of research before you get started.
Yeah. So even before I was even like approaching the point of becoming a YouTuber, I understood how YouTube functioned at like a pretty deep level. I love to learn things, especially if there's a bit of intrigue there. I'll keep digging and seeing what I can find. So I had been reading like data reports of YouTube before I even made a YouTube video. So I think that kind of desire to really understand things. And I've always just been, if I like something, like I really like something and I spend a lot of time, like the amount of football trivia I could give to you is absolutely insane, just because I was obsessed with it. And I love, if there's something I love, I can retain a ton of information. And the opposite is true if I hate it. But so that's what it was. And I knew I loved YouTube before I even made a video, because I was so enamored by like how this worked, and the fact that this is a vehicle to the billions of people out there. So I'd say that's what it really came from. It's just slowly the accumulation of understanding and knowledge. And I would say that I'm constantly social listening is the term that I've coined for it. Even before I was a creator, I would view through the lens of a creator when looking at what I clicked. Like I was consciously aware of, okay, before I watched a video, I'd stop and be like, why did I click this one and not that one? And I was constantly doing those little things of assessment before I even got into that. And now it's tenfold what it used to be. But I think that a true deep desire to understand was where it all came from. And then also a connection to YouTube as a whole.
Yeah. I mean, that's super interesting, because I've never scrolled and thought why I'm clicking things, but I definitely, like, if I watch YouTube all day, or I'm listening to it in the background, and then I'm like looking for a video to watch and actually sit down and do it, it takes me a little bit of time and I just scroll past things. So it is, I'll have to do some self-analysis of like why I'm choosing those, because it's a really good thing to do. And I'm going to guess that's like one of the success tips that you give out to your subscribers and followers.
100%. And I have this running, I usually have a note for a dedicated, basically like a brain dump or like a thought dump. And I'll have one for YouTube thoughts. And so if I ever come across someone who's either really winning or something that really caught my attention and stopped, then I definitely document that. And I'm constantly looking for different ways to tweak or implement a strategy that's working, because even what worked a year ago may not work as well today as something else may. So if you're not staying constantly up to date with what the user wants, because at the end of the day, that's all that matters, is if they click it, right? So if you're not staying up to date with that, you're only hurting yourself.
Yeah. And so with that being said, like how are you do a lot of like how-tos. You do a lot of these kind of, they seem like they're very in-depth and time-consuming videos, like something like, I'm going to grow to 1,000 Instagram followers in a week. That probably took more than just 7 days, right? So how are you staying ahead of the videos, and how do you track what videos you want to produce?
Yeah. So do a lot of research before I ever hit the record button, which is Think Media, I think says coins that term about a lot. But back then, like those were videos when I still had a full-time job and whatnot. I just tried to get at least one out per week. And I do have again, like a little bit of a knowledge dump for video ideas. And then I'll work backwards to see where the demand is. Because as a small YouTube creator, especially search traffic is going to be typically your best friend in the majority of cases. So especially from a value perspective. So I would pick, okay, well, what is really hot right now? And a big thing that I look for is breakthrough videos on smaller channels. So if you come across a video that is very quickly and rapidly getting, say, like 100,000 views on a channel that maybe has 15,000 subscribers, there's a severe demand for that video and a short of supply. So even if you make that video quickly, you're still going to get an additional bump than you probably would have. Are you going to get the 100K? Unlikely, but even 20 on a subscriber base of 500 or 1,000 is insane, right? So I would make that decision process. And then also I was very eager to be the first when something would happen and if you're in a niche and you can be the first to make a video, it can be insane for your trajectory. I think when I really learned this was when I think it was probably a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago now, Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram all crashed for like an hour. That was it. But I made a video while it was crashed and then put it out there. And my channel had maybe 800, 900 subscribers. And within 24 hours, that video got like 30,000 views and I gained 1,000 subscribers.
Whoa.
Wow.
So it's like, and then I was like, wow, that's when everything changed. And I started doing that every time something dropped. I should still be doing more of that. I still try to now, but back when I was still grinding at this, I'd come home from school or work or whatever. It'd be like 9 o'clock. And then something happened with Instagram or something happened with YouTube. And I would make the video right then and there and get it out because I understood that if I let any of my competition make it who had more authority and more of a viewership, I wouldn't get that placement. So if I don't do it now, the opportunity is gone. So it took sacrificing sleep. Sometimes I'd go to bed at 1 and then wake up again at 6 or 7, but I knew what it was building towards. And I also knew that the more that I did these and I sacrificed now, the closer I'd be able to completely be involved in the life that I wanted and building the business that I want.
You talk about a lot of tips like that, and they're tips that I see as like business tips or tips that are geared towards the technicalities of starting a podcast or a social media outlet of some sort, self-marketing, self-branding, whatever you want to call it. The one thing that I kind of wanted to learn more about from your how-to videos, especially with podcasting, is how you personally develop the skills of speaking and listening, really like conversational skills. Because in one video, you discuss how the conversational skills very easily transfer out into real life, and the skills that you have with listening and engaging in questions and not just going with a standard script, not just skipping to the next thing, but actually taking the time to listen, digest, and then give feedback and bounce ideas off of each other. That's extremely useful. But for somebody like me that tends to be more introverted, I'm the type of person that at the end of the day, I'm like, I want to shut everything off and just have some quiet time by myself. That's how I get my energy back. Interacting with people is more like an expenditure of energy. Mm-hmm. For somebody like that, how do you develop those skills that are necessary to be personable on social media, to engage somebody in a podcast where you need to come up with 20, 30 minutes, maybe even an hour, hour and a half of content and keep a listener engaged? Because those conversational skills, I don't think are something that come easily.
Yeah.
How did you develop those?
So I was very lucky that like my mom is probably the best at that I've ever met in my entire life. If you've met my mom for 30 minutes, almost everyone likes her after about 30 minutes. And that's because her ability to connect with people is insane. And something that I saw as a kid, but I don't think I fully appreciated it until I matured. But it's insane how much a social dynamic can change and how much you can get out of an experience for everyone involved when you can establish connection very, very quickly. And there's simple little things that can allow that to be facilitated. And I think that I, again, was lucky that I was able to learn from my mom at a young age, but I do think there's skills that can be developed when it comes to specifically a podcasting perspective. It definitely helps if you're talking about things that you're truly passionate about, because then you can revert back to a true conversation, right? Like it's not question, answer. It's a conversation and you're asking things that you genuinely want to know. That is always going to help you. So that'd be my first point of advice, is ensure that you're talking about things that you're passionate about. And two, if these are things that don't come naturally for you, study people that it does, or at least they've become good enough that it seems like it does. That study those people. What do they do? Again, break it down to like, why are they doing that? Sales was a big tool for this as well. As I grew up, was I think that even if you hate sales, you should work in it for at least a brief period of time, because these social and the psychological skills that it provides to you transfer to every facet of life, like literally everything. They will save you so much time and money and effort over the years because of how simply, and honestly, even fights like with people, because you can progressively get to a solution that you both want in less time and effort. So I'd say potentially work a sales job, or another book that I read that I was like, okay, like a lot of this stuff came naturally to me, but I think it'd be super helpful for someone that it didn't, is a classic, which is called How to Win Friends and Influence People. I would recommend that one a ton, because it really does a good job of breaking down what this powerful psychological or communication tool is. And then they also provide like in a story context of, okay, this is what it did. So it really sinks in.
That's great. That's great. How would you then tie that to somebody who's choosing to use Instagram or TikTok as their outlet? Because you also, I think this ties to what you said recently in it was in your 10 Instagram myths video. And you sort of emphasize the idea of putting the social back in social media.
Yes.
And that seems to me to be exactly tied into this, that if it's social, it should be some sort of a two-way street. It should involve listening. It should involve actual communication, and not just a one-way outlet. How would somebody who doesn't have the opportunity to actually speak and use their voice, especially for up to an hour, like they would on a podcast, how could somebody put the social back in social media on Instagram or on TikTok, where you have such a limited picture snapshot or 5, 10, 15 seconds of a clip?
Yeah. So I think use what the platform gives you natively. So obviously leverage the bit of attention that they do give you. Also, your ability to become a very effective micro storyteller is very impactful, because oftentimes when people read a whole book, you probably could have delivered the same sort of emotional change or impact in like 1/100th of the amount of actual written word being said. So I think your ability to take a larger principle and deliver it in a micro package is going to serve you tremendously on social, but in life in general, because attention spans are just shifting that way. They want the impact, they don't want the time. So your ability to get to that place is very, very important. And then honestly, just being available, right? Like, so once you get to a certain amount of followers on TikTok, you can start going live. And I recommend that tremendously, because that's going to force you to start thinking on your feet. It's going to take away the fear of being on camera, because you have to look at yourself for however long you're on there, and you can communicate with people in real time. And especially specific to TikTok, because you can go live on Instagram too. But with TikTok, it's also a great growth tool, because they'll throw in new people into your live. So you have the opportunity to stop someone's scroll, connect with them, provide them value. And just because you went live, you could now have a lifelong supporter of your product, service, or business, simply because you had that real human connection. So I think you do that once or twice and you see how that actually happens. You'll see how important these skills really are, not only for social, but for anything you want to do beyond that.
You said something interesting too. I wanted to pick your brain about. You said that people want the impact without the time. Do you think that cutting out the time lessens the impact at all? How do you think that cutting out the time affects the impact? That's sort of a very general and out there question, but in your personal opinion, especially being such an expert across platforms, like I kind of just stick to YouTube and that's what I do. So I'm curious just what your personal opinion is.
That's a great question. I think people have gotten to the point where they would rather take 80% of the impact for like a fraction of the time than experience the full impact. And am I to say that one's better or not? It's impossible to say, but I just think that's the way that attention spans and desires for consumption are shifting towards. So I'm not even going to say it's a good thing. I just think it's a reality of where we are. And it's something that you have to deal with, right? Like as a creator, you have to adapt to what people want. And that's one of the things that people really, really want, is these micro pieces of content. And that this may change in the future. People may have a deep desire in 5 years' time for really long-term impact delivered through a lot of content. But at the given point, shorter is typically better. And I look around at books, like almost every book I've ever written, I always say to myself, that could have been written in 20 pages. almost every book. And I think people are starting to get that conclusion with everything. And they're like, why can't we just do this now? Right. Like, and almost every book I look at, I'm like, I should have just read the Cole's notes because I could have saved so much time. So I think life has just become a microcosm of Cole's notes.
Cole's notes. I don't know what that is, but I'm going to say it's like the Cliff's notes.
Yes, same thing. So I think that maybe that's a Canada thing. Cole's
It's definitely a border crossing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I just want to say this real quick to anyone who's listening and made it as far as if you're thinking about making a podcast or you're doing anything, watch his 2 videos, because truly that is what drew me to the channel. And the advice you give, Drew and I have gone through every one of those little things. Exactly. We got to increase our audio. We've got to do all the little tips. We just went through them naturally. And if you listen to this, you're going to get all of that and start impacting right away.
Just a quick reflection too, off what Mike was saying, even just the tip of being and finding a niche and sticking with that was a concern for me at first. I was like, no, that seems too narrow. I would think that would be a negative thing, but what you said, and a lot of other people have said the same thing, that focusing on what you love is really the key to doing it, because it not only gives you an area where you could potentially be the forerunner or the leader in that, but it automatically gives you the passion to be able to talk about it for 20 minutes or to keep posting content on it. So just echoing that, yeah, we appreciate your advice a whole lot. We've definitely utilized your advice in your videos.
And for us, it's easy because
we
get to talk to people who love. Drew and I talked about YouTube all day, every day before this. Now we get to talk to people who love YouTube just as much as us. So it's like an amazing little niche we found.
Yeah.
Same piece of advice that you included, that you should just go for it. Like, reach out to people, and the worst that can happen is they won't respond, or they'll say no.
And you'll be surprised at how many do. And I would say, I just wanted to say this, that you guys run a tremendous show here too, because I've been on a lot of podcasts and does not flow smoothly like this. So kudos to both of you. You guys are doing things the right way for sure.
We appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you.
We appreciate that. We really were talking about like it, because we watched the videos and then we were like, man, are we doing this right? Like, is he going to critique us? I'm glad that you did this. So I want to talk about one obscure social media, not obscure. I think it's got to be up there. It's got to be like 5th in the social medias. But how important was posting to Reddit, or having your videos posted to Reddit, to your growth and success?
Reddit can be very, very impactful. Like, there's some loyal Reddit people that really love that platform. And it's something that I should have used more. And I intend to increase my presence there and how often I use that as a tool. But a lot of times it was from my friend who's a pretty active Reddit user, and he's involved with a lot of threads that are in these fields because he works in a very similar capacity to what I do. And he helped me out driving a lot of traffic, where if he saw someone or a thread start, he would post my videos in there. So it has brought me a decent amount of traffic. It can be a massive tool if you know how to properly leverage it. So I would say that is a very underutilized and underappreciated tool to grow on YouTube, that I think it's certainly worth going after. And even if you became one of the first person to really do a deep dive into that would help bring you a ton of traffic on YouTube, specifically natively as well.
Yeah, I agree, because I don't think that there's a good how-to video
really
to use it, because it is such a, YouTube is a great community. And we were just talking to another guy who's coming on later about Twitch, which I guess is another community, but Reddit is like a guarded community. I mean, they literally have guardians on the subs, right? There's people who go through and make sure the moderators are, getting everyone. So it's much different than YouTube, where it's like kind of a Wild West.
Yes.
So I want to talk about the niche a little bit, right? And when you're starting something, you got to find that niche. And when you just posted, I think a pretty recent video, maybe in the past 2 or 3 weeks, maybe in the past week, about growing a single account to 1,000 subscribers in a week. We talked about this before we started. And it was about puppies, right? And you were like, you can't use animals. Yeah. Talk about the love for puppies too, because I think the picture that you posted on Instagram was with Wheaten Terriers. I grew up with those dogs. So you gotta love them, their face when they're little. But like finding that niche, and you said animals is too broad. So pick the animal. And why is the niche so important, or have we already kind of killed that here in the podcast?
No, I think that's a great thing to touch on, and I can describe that pretty succinctly. Is the fact that these platforms, they're for-profit businesses, right? So if you don't give them the best idea of exactly who you are and who you're for, then they're not going to take a risk or a chance on you, because them showing you to a new potential person is a monetary risk on their behalf. It's a business risk. So if you don't make that as clear cut and obvious as possible, why would they take a risk on someone, right? So that's why, especially on YouTube, the more niche you can go as a brand new channel, the more that I recommend. You can go outwards. It's difficult to do the opposite. So it's one of those things where I don't know if you guys have read The Blue Ocean Strategy. It's a book where it essentially says exactly that, where your opportunity is where the people aren't. You're better off in the blue ocean than the shark infested waters that everybody else is trying to swim in, because they look at that blue ocean and they think, oh, that's too small, but they don't know that it might rain and it might collect more water with a bit of nurturing. So you're absolutely tremendously right. But it comes down to honestly understanding how these social media platforms operate on a fundamental business level, right? They're thinking about their own best interest and the best interest of their users, not as much so their new creators. So you have to find your place in that ecosystem. And it really comes down to being very specific in your offering and being consistent in that offering as well.
Wow. I mean, that answer truly blew me away. It's like, it's so obvious, and I've never thought of I always think of Instagram, and I think that's how they get away with these things, right? You think of Instagram as a fun thing, you think of YouTube as like a fun thing, but at the back end, they're like, if I show Ben's video before Totally Tubular podcast, I potentially could get someone to lose out and not spend more time on my platform. So it's all about the business side for them. So that is a great understanding of these tools themselves. I've never thought of it that way.
Yeah, and it's at the end of the day, it's what it all comes down to, because they've got shareholders. They need to make money, right? And that's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Your answer reminded me of something you said in your 7 podcast mistakes video too, that stuck with me, which was different is better than better.
Yeah. And I think I stole that from Think Media too. So I just want to give him credit too. But yeah, absolutely. Because when you see people because virality on YouTube in any sort of quick sense is very, very rare. But the ones that you do, they're different. They're unique. And one example that pops to my mind is Will Tennyson. I don't know if you guys have heard of him, but he was just doing the same thing that so many other people are doing by giving nutrition advice and fitness advice. But he did such a great job being unique and combining storytelling elements to this fitness content. And the majority of it was just like big muscle guys previously that were just like, eat this, do this, and that was it. Whereas he made it far more like what people were used to from like a sitcom or a show where there was character development, cliffhangers, like all this stuff. And he blew up. Like I think he's over 1 million subscribers, and it was like under a year or something like that. Like, truly insane. And he grew so quickly. And looking back on his channel, I was like, there's no way this was his first video, because his first video was an absolute banger. So I'm sure this is probably like his 3rd or 4th channel that he's tried, but now he got the sauce right. And it was amazing, but it comes through being unique and being you and being different, because it stands out like crazy.
That was something you mentioned in our pre-call too, is you wanted it seemed like you had the goal of working yourself more into your videos and building up that relationship with your viewers, as well as incorporating elements of TV shows and entertainment that you like. What have been some examples of facets of your videos that you've incorporated from TV shows or entertainment that have particularly worked really well for your videos, where you've gotten specific feedback from the numbers or from comments being like, oh, that was really funny? I could give one. I loved the Napoleon Dynamite clip of the clip saying, oh yeah, I think things are getting pretty serious now.
Yeah. So I'd say that's the easiest way that you can start doing it. And again, I saw that would potentially work, because I remember when I was watching videos, especially when they're aligned to what I do, where it's pretty deep, heavy, like educational type stuff, it's very easy to get overwhelmed. So when you throw in like a little pattern interrupt or some comedic relief, it kind of resets their internal clock and they're re-engaged again, right? It's almost like a stress reliever. So that's a great way to connect with people. Plus, they can then see your sense of humor, and people's ability to connect with you is going to be massive and also relate to you. So if just like that perfect example, if they found Napoleon Dynamite funny, simply me including that's in turn me saying that I too agree that's funny. And just that little bit of connection, they now feel like they know me a little better. And that increases the likelihood of them maintaining a relationship and actually building that and keeping them long-term. I would say I'd love to do more and more of that kind of stuff, and actually involving like me more in that capacity, because I think the one thing that I've not done a very great job of is my channel, because it is so educational, it's still very transactional. And so there's amazing things that come with that, because people come to you for a purpose and then they get that and they move on. But it also means that you don't get consistent viewership because they're not there for you. They're there for the information. So when you see people who are getting consistent views all the time, it's because of the constant. They're there for the person or the character or the feeling they get from that. So that's something that I'm really trying to incorporate more. And it's not easy. It's not easy to do, but if you can get it right, the rewards are insane.
Yeah, that's really like a pulling together of those tough skills that we talked about, like developing those sort of interpersonal skills while being able to project those skills across the divide of content creator to subscriber. That's a lot to think about.
Yeah, it's not easy for sure. It's difficult, and it's stuff that I'm working on all the time.
It seems like it's always but like your videos are forcing you to constantly work on those things and manipulate that and grow. Because if you're not, like you said, if you're not keeping up with it and researching, then you're already behind. Right? Checking out thumbnails, how they're adjusting, all those kind of things. So before we move on to subscriber questions and then the final question, Drew, do you have anything else?
I definitely wanted to ask about your courses that you have planned for the upcoming year. If you wanted to mention those, we mentioned this a little bit in the intro.
Yeah.
And I wanted to come back to this before we forgot about it.
Yeah. So I've been doing a lot of consulting over the past 2 years, and it's just something that I would love to be able to do that at scale, but it's just not scalable from a time perspective. So, and I've been asked so many times if I have a course or course kind of offering I have. So the goal for this year is to really hammer down a few, maybe 1 or 2 key core offerings, and then provide that to people to really help amplify specific things and what they're looking to do. So the plan is to launch those within the next 6 months or so. And it actually aligns with the rebrand of my podcast, which I've never said publicly, but we're rebranding the show as Social Media University. So that's going to be the whole essence of the show, is to bring on different experts within their fields. And then also that be the pillar brand or the parent company, if you will, for the different education products that we're going to be providing. So the goal is to make Social Media University the place from a video, written word, audio perspective to learn all things social media inside and out. Because I felt like that was one of the biggest things as a marketing student that was severely lacking, was the fact that stuff wasn't there. And to see how much of a role, how big of a role social plays in commerce today at large, it's something that severely needs to be served. And that's the goal, to serve it that way. So yeah, Social Media University will be launching within the next week or 2 with the rebrand. And then the courses will hopefully be live within the next few months or so, but to be determined.
I'm curious what that's going to do for you. I think that's going to cause a lot of growth, especially transitioning from, if you're even just rebranding the name, going from the name of just Ben Levitt channel to Social Media University, that's going to attract a lot of people. I would imagine. Yeah,
we'll see. Hopefully, who knows?
Yeah. I can't say anything bad about it, because I was trying to find the podcast itself and just the word project and passion on any keyword search. There's a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. So yeah, I think just that Social Media University will help to drive even some SEO for you. It'll be great. I'm excited to see that. And honestly, we'll probably take those courses. Just listening to you for an hour right now, we've probably learned more about growing our channel than we did ever before, even though we've watched a ton of your videos researching this, right? So it's like, it's pretty amazing just talking to you. And so you have a great subscriber base and a great following on Instagram. And so I think the Daily Weekcast, they asked about goals for 2021, but I think we just talked about where you're going, right?
Yeah.
But they also asked, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I think this is an amazing interview question that's just so generic, but it's a great one. And I think that if anyone we've interviewed, you'd have a plan for 5 years.
Yeah. So I definitely think macro, but it's difficult to get too stuck on that, because with the world that we live in, and especially everyone in this conversation, like with us leveraging tools like social and online business, what you think is possible today in 5 years time, a month down the road, something could change where that whole trajectory path is completely different. So if my answer might be totally different a month from now, but where I see myself today, if in 5 years time, would be, I'd love to be over 1 million subscribers on my main channel. Definitely. And then I would love for Social Media University to essentially fill that void in the education space that I see that is severely lacking, where there's not affordable education on things that move very quickly and that have a major play within business. And a lot of people want to learn this stuff. So I'd love for that to be the destination for that. And then also I really want to start developing once these become more where I can actually step away from these things a little bit and they're a little more automated. I would love to start doing why I got into all this stuff really is to start building brands and businesses for problems that I see in the marketplace or things that I feel could be improved, and having the capital and place to do that. So I think that I'll be living in the States within 5 years, somewhere warm all the time. That's what I will be doing. And a goal of mine is to also have property in my favorite places in the world. So like a place in Ann Arbor, Michigan, place in Jacksonville for sure, place here, place in Muskoka, a cottage area near me.
Oh, cool.
That's what I see within the next 5 years. A mixed bag of that stuff.
Yeah, you're diversifying your portfolio.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, you're doing an amazing growth start for a business, right? This is what small businesses do to grow to large businesses. Drew and I have had very similar conversations about how we want to grow, and it's that thought process, putting that into the reality is how you're going to make it happen. Right? There's so much power in that out there. And so another question, I think we answered.
Well, real quick, that ties so much to the adversity thing to me, because if you realize that like I'm going to encounter adversity no matter what, then yeah, shoot for the stars.
Exactly.
Buy property in Jacksonville. Yeah, why not? Like, why not?
And
it's going to be hard no matter what I do. So let's do it.
And I think people, this is the great thing about life, is that so few people will get to that place where they start to think like that like once you get there and you realize how few people are there, you're like, okay, well now it is realistic because I'm not competing against who I once thought I was. So things are so much more possible than you realize, just because you haven't given yourself the opportunity to even realize that it is possible.
I'm gonna say Drew's usually not this like amped during the podcast, and this is like fire to him. I love it.
Yeah, I'm not usually very emotional.
No, you are. When we talk YouTube, you get passionate, and especially if you talk something that you really are passionate about, which is growth through adversity, because don't let anything hold you back. And I think that's one of our goals from this podcast, and you've nailed this. I hope some kid listens to this or goes to your channel and gets motivated to get out there and start, and maybe he can hit the, whatever sport he's doing, then maybe he has an injury and he knows, oh, I know what to do next.
I love that.
Bradley J. Simmons, and I'm sorry if it's Simons, he asked how the pandemic has affected your plans. And I think it's an interesting question. He asked another question, but I think this one's interesting because a lot of channels can be affected very differently. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
So I'm one of the few people who's been very fortunate where the pandemic has really helped my business and my channel too. Right when it happened, every business owner, every person who ever thought they had an idea, they all wanted to go online. They all wanted to go to social. So I saw a huge spike in my numbers, like right when this stuff happened. And even within my agency side, there were so many people reaching out to me that probably wouldn't have had any interest before. And then they now saw that this is now going to be a necessity. I think that all the pandemic really did from the online space is expedite the trajectory of things a few years' time. Like I think this is how things would have gone anyways, but it just became a forced reality now. So that helped me tremendously. And then on a more personal side, I actually retore my ACL. So I've been waiting to get that surgery during this pandemic. So they haven't been doing any surgeries. So that's really sucked. But again, I'm just viewing this as, hey, I really need to buckle down, go hard now while I have the time and the resources and while I can still walk. So that way, when I am going through that, I can then use that time for more of the reflection piece, education, really getting that ball rolling and doing what I previously did just over again.
Yeah, right. That'll be actually, I don't see this as a bad injury again for you. It's wild because now you can sit down and you can put together all those courses while you're, laid up. You can put together the slideshows that you need to, the content creation, all of that can happen there. And it just seems like you tear your ACL, you get an opportunity.
Yeah, well, hopefully this is the last one, and hopefully it goes real well.
I hope so too. I hope that it's fully done after this. So I think we're going to leave it with two. And anyone who's made it this far and they're listening and they want to, make sure they follow all of us on Instagram and ask questions, because I know he's super responsive, and so are we. We'll respond to you. You get your question featured on the show. The final question I have for you, and I think this is something we want to make a staple, right? You've got to have that staple question, and it's, what are you currently watching on YouTube today? So what drives you to watch YouTube for fun?
For fun. This is a tough question because I don't really watch that much for fun. I would say that I watch podcast clips a lot. I would say I'm a big consumer of clips channels for podcasts and sports clips at large. And I think that what really intrigues me about that is because so often I'll click a video and I'll watch the clip and it won't even be exactly like what I was promised, but I don't leave angry. And it's very, very strange because the majority of things like that, of that nature, you would, because you're expecting this, but because it's still aligned, it works. So that's been something that I've been really fascinated about, is how impactful these clips channels can be. And it's because they've really done a great job of capturing like the smallest fragment of a nugget from the overall piece and making it as if that's the whole story, right? And they do such a great job of making a compelling title and a thumbnail. So I said the clips channel is something that I'm very, very passionate about. And then also seeking out these people who just do things so differently and so well. Will Tennyson was one example. And there's this other girl that I can't remember her name, but she blew up recently as well. And she's like I would really wish I remembered her name, because her channel is the strangest thing I've ever seen. Like, she has a really bad camera. Like, it's quite blurry. She is like over the top, like weird and quirky deliberately. And she gets so many views, like, and she still uses the same bad camera. Like, it's so strange, and it works so well, and it shouldn't, but it does. So I think seeking those kinds of things out are constantly things that I'll spend time into, and I'll get down to as a consumer and enjoy it. But then also from the other side of the coin, I'm always thinking like that. Even when I'm watching a movie, I'm thinking about, okay, well, why does this work so well? Or what were they trying to do here? It's a blessing and a curse because it helps with the job, but also like I'm always thinking like that. So those are the things I'm looking for: clips, and then people who are just doing cool, unique things.
Well, it sounds like that girl is just being herself, and I think that's it's somewhat rare on YouTube these days, because it's this vlog revolution. So many people are like animated and trying to do this thing. I'm like, I don't feel like it's actually who you are.
No, exactly right. And I think that there's going to be a resurgence of sorts where there's going to be a need for that, right? Where people really want people to be authentic, the good, bad, and the ugly, share it all, because that's what human beings are. And there isn't someone out there who isn't aware of that, right? To their core, they understand that there's ups and downs. And I really wish I could remember her name, but I can't. And she did a perfect job of just like being herself, and people resonated with it deeply.
Well, I hope our listeners stumble upon her and they get the same feeling.
Yeah, and if you do, you'll know, because it's like that grainy footage, and she's doing good things, but it just works. And she talks about like all sorts of stuff, but people still love it and they show up. I'll probably find her after, and I'll message you guys.
Yeah, send it to us, and then I'll put it in the show notes.
Sounds good.
Ben, I got one random last question for you. And it's, as somebody who has built so much of his personal brand on being social, do you take time for solitude?
That's a great question. Probably not as much as I should. I do think that there is definitely value in stepping away and doing that stuff, like, and plotting time to actually do that, because if you don't with anything, it won't do it. Life moves too fast. I think there's a lot that can be done within solitude, and I think it plays a vital role in a healthy life, regardless of your situation. So I think that's something that I should definitely be working on. I don't do enough of it, but I do here and there.
I don't mean to like promote it or anything, just pure curiosity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that there is value in it, and I think I don't do too much of it, to be honest. But I feel like hopefully I'll build enough systems and things where I can take the advantage of the benefits of doing so.
Well, hopefully with the acquisition of all the real estate you've talked about, maybe you can go to or to Jacksonville and have some solitude on a beach somewhere.
That's definitely in the plan for sure.
Yeah, well, I look forward to it, and hopefully one day, if we're both in Florida, we can all go surf. Jacksonville's fun. It's a great city.
Yeah, there's some good surf up there.
Yeah, I've surfed once before. I wasn't that great, but you guys can definitely teach me.
The best part about surfing is we'd go surf with Kelly Slater, and all of us would have just as fun of a time.
Sure.
Yeah. So I appreciate the time today. This was an awesome conversation. I really, really was blown away by your aptitude and your just ability to understand things from a business sense and purely see them in this unbelievable way. You showed me a different side of social media that I had never even seen. I've been using social media for, I don't even know. I got Facebook in high school, so almost a long time. But yeah, listen listen to his podcast, because you'll get inspired by some amazing people, right? Don't ever doubt yourself. Reach out to whoever you want. Go out, start something new. Follow him, subscribe to his channel, help everyone grow, and you'll end up growing yourself either mentally, physically, or through some other avenue, maybe some solitude. I don't know. We'll see. But I appreciate the time today. It was an amazing conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.
Thanks so much, both of you guys. I had a blast, and thanks to everyone who listened. If you want to connect with me, send me a DM over on Instagram. I reply to every single one, so I'd love to chat.
Wow, that's a whole nother conversation. Time consuming, but it is the best way to do it. I couldn't agree. It's the best way to engage with your customer, your followers.
Yeah, it's a lot of time, but the impact is insane.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks so much. Everything's in the show notes below it. Even if he remembers that girl's name, it'll be down there.
Thanks, guys.